Hello. So it says it right there in the title. We're going to talk a little bit, or I'm going to talk a little bit about the early history of female teachers in the U.S. So I think this is interesting that even though women dominate as classroom teachers and have for a pretty long time, gender equity issues are not really addressed in any of the arenas of schooling. For one, the teacher education program is not really talking about gender equity that often, or not talking about how women are valued less as teachers. You know, it's kind of one of those soft fields where anybody can do it, right? And we also have a problem with racial bias in the teaching field. So I don't think I said any of that very well. I think I'm just going to read the quote. That women dominate as classroom teachers, yet gender equity has not received much attention in teacher education programs, is testament to the historic devaluation of females in the teaching profession and a blindness to the gender and racial bias in the social, economic, and political structure of schools. Okay, hey, say this is interesting. I'm going to just digress. This is really what my whole lecture is about, is how we devalue women in this field, because it started out as a men's field, as I'll show you. And we also have devalued more women of color in this field. And so it just kind of reflects our general society, right? In terms of economic gains, wages, you know, political structure of schools where there's more males and white females in the administrative position. So it does go on and on and on. So excuse the bumbling here, but I don't even know how else to put it. Because here's the deal. So when we look at the economic structure, the power structure of a lot of schools currently 76% of public school teachers are women now. So that's pretty good, right? Even though when you think about it, 99% of the workforce is female. So we'd like to get that up a little more. But what's interesting is only 16% of public school teachers are women of color. We can't keep women of color in the schools. And there's all sorts of racist and sexist reasons for that, right? So then we have 54% of public school teachers are women. Again, those numbers should be up higher given the population of employees. Only 18% of public school principals are of color. And that was really hard for me to find. I can't even break it down at all. That was a tough figure to find. So 33% of public school superintendents, that's the queens, right? The up there at the very top are the kings. Only 33% are women, and only 11% are women of color. 40% of schools have no teachers of color in them, which is not very reflective of our society, right? So there's some big problems with how we have broken down the power in terms of gender and race in our school systems. Okay, I guess we're going to figure out how this happens, right? We are. Here we go. So way back in the day, during the colonial periods, the people who were teachers were white males. And that's because, look what it says, that, that was a good role model, right? And it was only boys that were receiving education. And of course, it was mostly white boys that were receiving education, because kids of color were, schools cost money, and they were out working and helping, make ends meet with their families. So it was a pretty white world back then. And it was a pretty male white world back then. So it's like we needed to have good role models, and that would be men with authority, knows how to discipline. They weren't all easy marks like women. So, but then what happened was the industrial age came along, and there were better jobs for men, for white men, better jobs, right? Paid more money, have a little bit of flexibility, not have to work with a bunch of brats. And so that meant that tons of these white male teachers left this classroom for better places to be. And so that's when we talk about the feminization of teachers. Did I say that right? The feminization. Yeah, I did. That happened when the white male teachers bailed and they had to put somebody in their place, right? And who came along? Women. Ta-da! So then they switched the whole deal, right? Remember, males were the big, strong uh, role model that these boys needed, but now all of a sudden we thought, oh no, we really need to have women in there because they're caregivers and they're just natural teachers because they love children so much, right? So by 1850 and on, the majority of United States teachers were women. And that's what it kind of came about. So 4 out of 5 teachers were women by then. Let's see what this say. Teachers endured other consequences of feminization. So then all of a sudden, teaching wasn't such a noble job, right? Because anybody could do it. Because if women can do it, then anybody can do it. And that's kind of like nursing and social work, teaching, just kind of domestic jobs, right? Lower wages, lower esteem. So that's kind of when it all sort of started coming together there, that women's work was in the home, but it was also taking care of children, and that could happen in a public school setting as well. This is a great one, right? God seems to have made women particularly suited to guide and develop the infant mind. And it seems very poor policy to pay a man $20 or $22 a month for teaching children the ABCs when a female could do the work more successfully at 1/3 of the price. What a deal. So for African American female teachers, it was even less of a deal, right? They got lower wages because of racism and gender bias. So let's see, this is really crazy. So a lot of the teachers of color, and there's more on African American teachers, not much on other women of color. Hard to find that stuff, dig it up. But teachers of color were usually just hired on a temporary basis, right? No contracts, always on probation. And you know what that means, all of you working people out there, that you just never really have job security. And so your wages can stay low and you're always kind of looking over your shoulder, right? So that was happening to teachers of color, women of color, back in the day. But nonetheless, it was still a cool gig for females because way back in the 18th century, right, the 1860s, let's say, that the only way for women to kind of get out of their houses sometimes was to marry. And, maybe they just did it, as a way out. And so by having their own salaries, they had a better chance of making some choices that were more beneficial to them. So that was a cool thing about teaching. Even though they didn't get much in terms of salary, it still gave them some independence they had never had before. But again, the conditions were kind of crazy. Look at this classroom. Many had to instruct over 60 children at a time in one room classroom. Crazy. That is packed. Look, there's one teacher in there. But no matter what, it was still a great avenue for females to have some independence. So even though it was hard work, it wasn't respected very much. The wages were crazy. You had to do all the cleaning and everything. There were so many restrictions back in the early times in terms of what you had to wear. Like you couldn't go out on your own. Your skirts had to go to your ankles. So there was a lot of policing of female teachers during that time. But nonetheless, it gave them an out. It gave them some autonomy and independence, right? Money's power, for sure. So what was kind of interesting and kind of cool is that now there's this field, this profession, teaching, that had lots of women in it. and women were kind of getting together a little bit and exchanging stories about their wages or their working conditions and their job security, all the stuff that wasn't really happening. And so teachers were kind of like wising up a little bit and talking about it more and thinking about what they could do to make changes to their working conditions, which that was pretty cool. That was the first time that women as a group really got together to rebel. And so and rebel they did. So by like it says here, by 1930, after a little bit of protesting, women were being heard. Teachers were being heard. They were an entity that needed to be listened to, right? And so things started changing in terms of some wages, some working conditions, the ability for women to hold jobs at the higher jobs, the administrative jobs. So some really cool things were beginning to kind of percolate for women as a political group, for teachers as a political group. And again, lots happening during the civil rights movement in terms of integration, and that's a crazy time for sure. Brown versus Board of Education, where they had to force integration because of the unequal conditions of schools. So interesting time to be a teacher for sure. If you can read this, thank a teacher. So again, continuing protesting, continuing advocating for higher wages and also for better conditions for students. So a lot of times when you hear that teachers are on strike, they're not only on strike for themselves. Sometimes they're just solely on strike for better conditions for their students, like textbooks for everybody. I mean, it's so interesting how schools are not equitable. I've talked about this before in terms of you think that, okay, yeah, everybody gets the same slice of pie. Well, they don't. And so teachers have been fabulous advocates for their students, as well as trying to increase their wages and their working conditions, because they started out pretty paltry there, right? Because it's kind of interesting. Everyone thinks, oh yeah, I can be a teacher, easy peasy, lemon squeezy, right? And so then we don't give teachers their due respect because we think anybody can do the job. Talk to a teacher about that. So what the saddest thing is, because even with all the advocating, all the protesting, all the unions and organizing and really working hard to get their story out in terms of working conditions, teachers are leaving the field really, really quickly because of the working conditions and in some areas, the very low pay. So according to this one, let's see, the NEA, the National Education Association, is a really big group across the United States. Estimate 40 to 50% of teachers leave the job within their first 5 years. And so a lot of that has to do with wages, right? So you go to school and you get your master's and then you enter this field, and a lot of times you're not respected in this field with the amount of education you have, and also you're not compensated for the amount of education and what you're doing. So female teachers and male teachers just bolt. They get out. So this was interesting. I have a master's degree, 16 years of experience, work 2 extra jobs, and donate blood plasma to pay the bills. I'm a teacher in America. I mean, that's stark kind of reality for some areas. I mean, it depends on where you live in the United States. Certainly there are teachers that are making some respectable salaries, and then other places so disparate, so crazy, so crazy. And again, we take it back to the whole gender bias thing, right? Because if it's women's work, if it's a female's job, then we can automatically know that you're not going to get compensated as much if this was considered men's work, right? So poor salary and lack of respect is a really big reason why female teachers don't stick it out. Ta-da, right there. Says it all. So remember what she said? Yeah, better deal. Better deal with a female teacher. More bang for your buck. So what do you want to be when you grow up? Maybe not a teacher, huh? It's interesting, of course, valuable profession. Lots of reasons to do it. But when we look at the impact of gender bias in this whole world, we can really see the obvious ways it impacts teachers and the whole schooling industry, right? Okay, told you it was going to be short. So thanks for listening, and I will talk to you soon.